Translate this. I'll give your mom my job." The words exploded through Ravencrest Industries' boardroom like a gunshot. Maxfield Ravencrest slammed down a 200-page Japanese contract, his voice dripping with mockery, as 20 executives erupted in laughter. The $500 million Tokyo Corp deal hung in the balance, and he needed a professional interpreter, not some kid. In the corner, 17-year-old Nia Rhodes stood in her janitor's uniform, gripping her cleaning cloth as the suited executives laughed at her expense. They saw a teenage cleaning girl. They had no idea what they were looking at. She glanced down at the Japanese contract, recognizing every character, every legal nuance, every cultural subtlety that could make or break international negotiations. 9 years of secret study had prepared her for this exact moment. Her lips curved into the thinnest smile. These corporate giants had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. The game had begun. The 62nd floor of Ravencrest Industries pierced the Manhattan skyline like a glass dagger. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Central Park below, where autumn leaves painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the executive boardroom, power radiated from every surface: the Italian marble walls, the handcrafted mahogany table that could seat 30, the crystal chandelier, casting prismatic light across faces worth billions collectively. Nia Rhodes moved through this temple of capitalism like a ghost. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound against the polished floors as she emptied wastebaskets and wiped down surfaces that gleamed under the afternoon sun. The executives barely registered her presence, their attention focused on quarterly reports and profit margins that could reshape entire industries. She had learned to become invisible here, a skill that served her well in a world where people like her were expected to fade into the background. Maxfield Ravencrest commanded the room from his position at the head of the table. His presence filled the space with an authority that seemed to bend the very air around him. When he spoke, conversations died. When he moved, eyes followed. The fortune he had built from nothing in the tech sector had transformed him into something more than human in the eyes of Wall Street, a force of nature wrapped in Italian silk and Swiss precision. "The Tokyo Corp merger represents our gateway into the Asian markets," Ravencrest continued, his fingers drumming against the mahogany surface with mechanical precision. "But their cultural requirements are particular. They insist on conducting all negotiations in Japanese with simultaneous interpretation. No recordings, no digital translations. Old-school methodology that requires old-school expertise." Nia paused in her dusting her cloth, hovering over a crystal paperweight. She had been cleaning these offices for 8 months, ever since her mother secured them both positions here. The work paid better than anything else available to a 17-year-old, without connections, and the flexible schedule allowed her to maintain her honor roll status at Washington Heights High. But more importantly, these after-hours cleaning shifts had given her access to something invaluable information. "Sir, what about the Patterson firm?" ventured Marcus Webb, the head of international relations. His expensive cologne couldn't quite mask the nervous sweat that always appeared when he addressed his boss directly. They handled the Berlin negotiations beautifully. Ravencrest's laugh held no warmth. "Patterson charges $200,000 per week plus expenses. Their lead interpreter is booked solid through next spring." He gestured toward the scattered documents covering the table's surface. "We need someone immediately. Someone hungry enough to work for reasonable compensation." From across the room, Nia caught fragments of Japanese text on the projected contract. Her pulse quickened as she recognized the complex legal terminology, the subtle linguistic nuances that could make or break international agreements. Years of disciplined study had given her more than basic fluency. She understood the cultural context, the unspoken implications that could determine success or failure in high-stakes negotiations. "What about internal candidates?" suggested Patricia Chen, the chief financial officer. Her tone carried the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to navigate corporate politics with surgical precision. Surely someone in our international division has the necessary qualifications. Raven Crest's steel blue eyes swept the room with predatory focus. Our international team consists of MBAs who learned tourist-level Japanese from audio courses. Tokyo Corp isn't interested in amateur hour. He leaned back in his leather chair, the motion causing it to creak softly in the otherwise silent room. They want someone who understands not just the language, but the cultural intricacies that govern serious business relationships. The irony wasn't lost on Naya. She had spent 9 years studying Japanese language and culture, beginning with children's books borrowed from the public library and progressing through university-level texts she accessed online. Her mentor, Professor Hiroshi Tanaka from Columbia University, had praised her intuitive grasp of linguistic subtleties during their weekly video sessions. But here in this room, surrounded by people who measured worth in degrees and pedigrees, her knowledge might as well have been invisible. "Perhaps we should consider postponing," offered David Park, the head of legal affairs. His suggestion landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of unease among the assembled executives. "Give ourselves time to find the right candidate through proper channels." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Raven Crest's expression hardened into something that could cut glass. "Postponing means losing the deal entirely. Tokyo Corp has 3 other American firms competing for this partnership. Delay signals weakness, and weakness is something they neither respect nor tolerate." Naya continued her work, her movements methodical and practiced. She had learned to read the emotional currents in these meetings, to understand the unspoken hierarchies that governed every interaction. Raven Crest ruled through a combination of brilliance and intimidation, his success built on an ability to identify opportunities that others missed and exploit them with ruthless efficiency. "There has to be someone," muttered Webb, shuffling through his notes with increasing desperation. "Someone qualified who's available on short notice." Raven Crest stood abruptly, his movement causing several executives to straighten unconsciously in their chairs. He walked to the windows, his silhouette stark against the Manhattan skyline. "Qualified candidates don't appear from thin air, Marcus. They're cultivated through years of education and experience. They command premium prices because they represent premium value." The dismissive tone in his voice triggered something in Naya's chest, a familiar burn that she had learned to suppress. She had heard variations of this speech countless times, the assumption that excellence was the exclusive domain of those with the right backgrounds, the right connections, the right appearance. Her cloth moved across the conference table's surface with slightly more pressure than necessary. Without warning, Raven Crest spun around his gaze, landing on Naya for the first time during the meeting. His eyes held the cold assessment of someone evaluating a piece of furniture. "You there?" he said, his voice carrying across the room like a whip crack. "Cleaning girl." Every head in the room turned toward her. Naya felt the weight of their collective attention, the mixture of curiosity and mild embarrassment that accompanied the acknowledgement of service staff in professional settings. She straightened slowly, her hand still gripping the cleaning cloth. "Yes, sir." Her voice remained steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. Raven Crest gestured toward the contract spread across the table, his movements theatrical and deliberate. The pages were covered in dense Japanese text, complex legal terminology that would challenge even experienced translators. "Translate this, I'll give your mom my job." And the room erupted in nervous laughter, the sound bouncing off the marble walls like breaking glass. Several executives exchanged glances, their amusement tinged with discomfort at their boss's casual cruelty. But none of them spoke up. None of them challenged the implicit mockery in his words. Naya looked down at the contract, her eyes moving across the Japanese characters with practiced ease. Under her breath, so quietly that only she could hear, she whispered a single phrase in perfect Japanese. Su desune. That's right indeed. The smile that curved her lips was razor thin, invisible to everyone in the room. She had just planted the first seed in what would become Maxfield Ravencrest's downfall. The staff elevator descended through the bowels of Ravencrest Industries, with mechanical indifference carrying Naya past floors she would never be invited to access during business hours. Each level housed departments that generated millions in revenue, research and development, on 47 international markets, on 32 strategic planning, on 28. She knew their functions not from any official briefing, but from fragments of conversation overheard during her cleaning rounds, documents glimpsed while emptying trash bins, and the careful observation that had become second nature to her. The basement level housed the service areas where the building's invisible workforce began and ended their shifts. Lockers lined the walls like metal coffins, each one assigned to someone whose labor kept the corporate machine functioning. Naya changed out of her uniform in silence, her movements efficient and practiced. Around her, other cleaning staff spoke in hushed Spanish and broken English, their conversations punctuated by the exhausted sighs of people whose days had begun before dawn. Her mother, Elena Rhodes, waited by the time clock, with the patience of someone who had learned not to rush the small rituals that marked the boundaries between work and life. At 42, she carried herself with a dignity that refused to bend, despite years of scrubbing other people's messes. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back into the same practical bun that Naya had inherited, along with her determined chin and knowing eyes. "How was your shift, mija?" Elena asked, using the Spanish endearment that connected them to roots stretching back to Detroit's struggling neighborhoods. Her voice carried traces of an accent that emerged when fatigue wore down the careful pronunciation she had cultivated for professional interactions. Naya shouldered her backpack, heavy with textbooks that cost more than her weekly wages. "Educational," she replied the word, carrying multiple layers of meaning that her mother would understand, without explanation. They walked through the parking garage, toward the bus stop, their footsteps echoing in the concrete cavern filled with luxury vehicles they would never own. The ride home took them through neighborhoods that told the story of New York's economic geography in reverse. From Manhattan's gleaming towers, they traveled through Queens' working-class communities, where bodega signs competed with check-cashing storefronts for sidewalk space. Elena dozed against the window, her body finally releasing tension, accumulated during 10 hours of industrial-strength cleaning supplies and demanding supervisors. Naya used the transit time productively, pulling Japanese language workbooks from her backpack. The complex characters demanded absolute focus, each stroke carrying meaning that could alter entire sentences. She had discovered her linguistic aptitude by accident 8 years earlier, when a misplaced library book about origami had included basic Japanese vocabulary. What began as childhood curiosity had evolved into something approaching obsession, or perhaps destiny. Their apartment occupied 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The walls were thin enough to transmit neighbors' conversations in 3 languages, and the heating system produced more noise than warmth. But Elena had transformed the space into something approaching sanctuary through careful attention to details that cost nothing but time. Handmade curtains filtered the harsh streetlight, and plants rescued from sidewalk trash bloomed in coffee can planters along the fire escape. Naya's bedroom doubled as her study space, its walls covered with achievement certificates that documented her academic progression. Honor roll certificates from 3 consecutive years shared space with language proficiency awards and a scholarship letter from Columbia University's summer program. Her desk rescued from a neighborhood yard sale and refinished with sandpaper, and determination supported a laptop that had been her 15th birthday present, purchased with money saved from Elena's overtime shifts. She opened her Japanese business correspondence textbook. its pages marked with color-coded annotations that tracked her progress through increasingly complex material. Professor Tanaka had insisted that true fluency required understanding cultural context, not just linguistic mechanics. Their weekly video sessions conducted during Elena's evening shifts had evolved into graduate-level discussions about international commerce and diplomatic protocol. The irony of Ravencrest's casual dismissal burned in her chest like swallowed fire. He had mocked her potential while sitting atop a deal that required exactly the expertise she possessed. The Tokyo Corporation contract, from what she had observed during the meeting, involved manufacturing partnerships that could reshape automotive supply chains across 3 continents. Complex agreements like that demanded translators who understood engineering terminology, cultural negotiation styles, and the subtle linguistic cues that could make or break billion-dollar relationships. Her phone buzzed with a message from Professor Tanaka. Weekly session confirmed for Friday evening. Please review the attached materials on formal Japanese business presentation structure. Your progress continues to exceed expectations. Naya smiled as she downloaded the files, each one representing another building block in the foundation she was constructing for her future. Columbia's East Asian Studies program had accepted her application for early admission contingent on maintaining her current academic performance through senior year. The scholarship would cover tuition, but living expenses remained her responsibility, a challenge that made her current employment essential despite its limitations. Elena's key turned in the front door lock with the metallic rasp that signaled the end of another workday. She entered quietly, mindful of Naya's study schedule, and began preparing their dinner with ingredients that had been purchased based on sale prices rather than preferences. Their evening meal consisted of rice beans and vegetables that Elena transformed into something nourishing through techniques learned from her own mother decades earlier. The head supervisor mentioned possible overtime shifts next week, Elena said, settling at their small kitchen table with a plate that contained half the portion she had served her daughter. Holiday cleaning contracts are starting early this year. Naya looked up from her textbook, recognizing the careful tone her mother used when discussing money. Extra shifts meant more income, but also increased fatigue and less time for the household management that Elena somehow accomplished, despite her demanding schedule. I could pick up additional weekend hours, Naya offered, though they both knew her academic commitments made extensive work schedules impossible. Your education comes first, Elena replied firmly, using the voice that had guided Naya through childhood with unwavering priorities. Everything else can wait. But as Naya returned to her studies, her mind churned with possibilities that had nothing to do with patient waiting. Ravencrest's contract represented an opportunity that could change their circumstances permanently if she could find a way to demonstrate her qualifications without triggering the class-based prejudices that governed corporate hiring practices. She pulled out her phone and began recording a voice memo speaking in fluent Japanese as she analyzed the contract sections she had memorized during the afternoon meeting. Her pronunciation was flawless, her understanding of technical terminology comprehensive. Tomorrow, she would begin implementing a plan that would either validate years of preparation or destroy any chance of advancing beyond her current circumstances. The choice, for the first time in her life, belonged entirely to her. The fluorescent lights of Washington Heights High School buzzed with electronic persistence as Naya navigated hallways that smelled of industrial disinfectant and teenage ambition. Her classmates moved through their morning routines with casual confidence, never questioning whether they deserved to occupy space in the world. She envied them that certainty, even as she recognized how it blinded them to opportunities requiring sacrifice. Her advanced placement economics class occupied a corner classroom where morning sunlight struggled through windows that hadn't been cleaned since the previous semester. Mrs. Patterson, whose passion for supply chain theory had survived 30 years of budget cuts, distributed worksheets exploring international trade agreements with academic precision. Today, we'll examine how cultural factors influence business negotiations. Mrs. Patterson announced. Can anyone provide an example of how language barriers might impact contract formation? Naya's hand remained in her lap, despite the detailed answer forming in her mind. She had learned to moderate her participation, avoiding the overachiever label that could isolate her from peers whose friendship might prove valuable. Instead, she listened as other students offered responses, demonstrating theoretical understanding without practical depth. During lunch period, she claimed her usual table in the library's reference section, where thick academic journals created barriers against social interruption. Her laptop displayed multiple browser tabs, Japanese business terminology databases, Columbia University's online linguistics resources, and a secure email account created specifically for professional correspondence. Tokyo Corporation's official website loaded with corporate efficiency, its sleek design reflecting the technological precision that had made them a global leader in automotive manufacturing. Naya navigated to their contact page and composed an email with the careful formality that Japanese business culture demanded. Dear Tokyo Corporation International Relations Department, she began, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced certainty. I am writing to introduce myself as a linguistic consultant specializing in Japanese-American business communications. My expertise encompasses technical translation, cultural interpretation, and strategic communication protocols for high-level corporate negotiations. She paused, considering how to present her qualifications without revealing her age or current circumstances. The corporate world operated on assumptions about credibility that had little connection to actual competence. Her academic achievements and language proficiency meant nothing if presented within the wrong context. My recent analysis of your proposed partnership with Ravencrest Industries has identified several areas where cultural miscommunication could compromise successful agreement formation. She continued, crafting each sentence with diplomatic precision. I would welcome the opportunity to provide consultation services that ensure optimal outcomes for all parties involved. The email included her academic credentials letters of recommendation from Professor Tanaka and samples of her translation work carefully edited to remove any identifying information about her high school status. She signed it simply as N. Rhodes Linguistic Consultant and attached a professional headshot that Elena had helped her take against their apartment's plain white wall. After sending the message, Naya opened the photos she had discreetly captured of Ravencrest's contract during yesterday's meeting. Her phone's camera had recorded enough detail to reconstruct substantial portions of the agreement, though the legal complexity required careful analysis. She spread printed pages across the library table and began translating methodically, her pen moving across notebook paper with surgical precision. The contract revealed exactly what she had suspected. Ravencrest was attempting to structure the partnership in ways that heavily favored American interests, while offering minimal benefits to their Japanese counterparts. Shipping cost calculations had been manipulated through currency exchange projections that assumed rates favoring the dollar. Quality control standards were written to accommodate American manufacturing tolerances that fell below Japanese expectations. Most damaging, the intellectual property sharing agreements were structured to give Ravencrest access to Toyota's technological innovations while protecting their own developments behind restrictive licensing terms. Naya smiled grimly as she documented each problematic clause. Ravencrest's reputation for aggressive negotiation tactics apparently extended to borderline fraudulent contract manipulation. Tokyo Corporation would never accept these terms if they understood their implications, which meant they either hadn't received competent translation services or they were conducting their own parallel investigation before responding. Her phone vibrated with an incoming email notification. The sender's address contained Japanese characters, followed by the Tokyo Corporation domain. Naya's pulse accelerated As she opened the message, its formal Japanese text, indicating official corporate communication. "Dear Ms. Rhodes," the email began, translated through her mental processes with automatic fluency. "Your inquiry regarding the Ravencrest Industries partnership has been forwarded to our senior negotiation team. We would be interested in scheduling a preliminary consultation to discuss your analysis of cultural factors affecting this agreement. Please advise your availability for video conference discussion." And the message was signed by Kenji Yamamoto, Senior Director of International Partnerships, a title that carried significant authority within Japanese corporate hierarchy. Naya stared at the screen, processing the implications of official recognition from one of the world's largest corporations. They had responded within hours of her initial contact, suggesting that her assessment had identified concerns they were already considering. She composed her reply with the deference that Japanese business protocol required, while maintaining the professional confidence necessary to establish credibility. "I am honored by your response and would welcome the opportunity to discuss my observations regarding optimal communication strategies for American-Japanese business relationships. I am available for video consultation at your convenience." The rest of her school day passed in a blur of routine classes that seemed suddenly irrelevant compared to the opportunity developing in her inbox. During chemistry, she calculated molecular structures, while mentally rehearsing Japanese business presentation formats. In American history, she took notes about progressive-era reforms, while planning how to present her analysis of Ravencrest's contract manipulations. Her shift at Ravencrest Industries began with the same routine tasks: emptying waste baskets, dusting surfaces, maintaining the invisible cleanliness that executives demanded without acknowledging. But now she moved through those spaces with different purpose, her cleaning cart providing cover for more detailed observation of corporate operations. The International Relations Department occupied the 32nd floor, its open workspace design facilitating collaboration, while ensuring that sensitive conversations remained audible to anyone with reason to linger nearby. Naya worked methodically through her assigned areas, her cloth moving across surfaces, while her ears tracked discussions about shipping schedules, manufacturing delays, and cultural challenges, consuming increasing amounts of staff attention. Marcus Webb's office door stood partially open, revealing a space cluttered with contract drafts and cultural guidebooks that suggested desperate preparation for negotiations he wasn't qualified to handle. His phone conversations carried the edge of panic as he contacted translation services that either couldn't accommodate his timeline or commanded fees exceeding his budget authorization. "We need someone who understands more than basic language conversion," she heard him explaining to yet another potential contractor. "Tokyo Corporation expects cultural competency, not just word-for-word translation. They're testing our commitment to respectful partnership, and amateur mistakes could destroy months of relationship building." Naya's phone buzzed with another message from Yamamoto, this one containing a video conference link and a specific time request tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The timing would coincide perfectly with Elena's overtime shift, providing privacy for what could become the most important conversation of her life. She responded with formal acceptance, then began preparing for a meeting that would either validate everything she had worked toward or expose her as an ambitious teenager operating beyond her legitimate sphere. Tomorrow night, she would present herself as a professional consultant to executives who controlled billions in international commerce. The performance would require every skill she had developed, and several she was still learning. But for the first time since entering Ravencrest's boardroom, Naya felt the balance of power beginning to shift in directions that her opponents couldn't yet perceive. The security camera in the 32nd floor break room captured Naya's image at exactly 3:47 a.m. Her cleaning cart positioned beside the water cooler, while she reviewed printed emails on her phone. What the camera couldn't record was the content of those messages' detailed correspondence between Menuo, Rhodes linguistic consultant, and Kenji Yamamoto of Tokyo Corporation that had been exchanged over the past 72 hours. The video conference had exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Yamamoto and his team had listened with professional attention as she presented her analysis of Ravencrest's contract, their questions probing deeper into cultural implications and linguistic subtleties that revealed their genuine concern about potential miscommunication. By the session's end, they had invited her to submit a comprehensive review of all partnership documents, a request that carried implicit criticism of Ravencrest's current approach. Naya had worked through 3 consecutive nights to produce a 40-page analysis that dissected every problematic clause while proposing alternative language that addressed both parties' interests fairly. Her recommendations had been received with enthusiasm that bordered on relief, suggesting that Tokyo Corporation had been searching for exactly the kind of cultural expertise she provided. But success carried unexpected consequences. This morning, Marcus Webb had arrived at his office to find a formal inquiry from Tokyo Corporation, questioning several contract provisions and requesting clarification on recent cultural consultation services that Ravencrest had allegedly arranged. The email copied to Ravencrest himself specifically mentioned Miss Rhodes as a contact point for ongoing discussions. Webb's panicked response had triggered a security review that was now spreading through the building like digital wildfire. Naya watched from her cleaning station as IT specialists examined access logs and surveillance footage. Their investigation focused on identifying whoever had leaked confidential contract information to external parties. "Every employee with access to sensitive documents needs to be interviewed," declared Sarah Mitchell, the chief security officer, whose reputation for thoroughness had earned her both respect and fear throughout the organization. Her voice carried across the open workspace with military precision. "Someone provided Tokyo Corporation with detailed analysis of our negotiation strategy. That constitutes industrial espionage." Naya's hands remained steady as she emptied trash bins that contained the detritus of executive decision-making, discarded coffee cups, crumpled drafts, and printed emails that revealed the mounting pressure surrounding the Tokyo deal. Her expression betrayed nothing as she listened to conversations that grew increasingly desperate with each hour that passed without identifying the security breach. Ravencrest emerged from the elevator bank at 8:30, his usual commanding presence amplified by barely controlled fury. He moved through the workspace like a force of nature, his steel blue eyes scanning faces for signs of guilt or deception. When his gaze fell on Naya, she continued her methodical cleaning routine without acknowledging his scrutiny. "Conference room now," he commanded, his voice cutting through ambient office noise with surgical precision. The assembled executives filed into the glass-walled space, where yesterday's confidence had been replaced by the nervous energy of people whose careers depended on solving an impossible puzzle. Naya positioned herself near the conference room's exterior, her cart providing legitimate reason to remain within earshot, while Ravencrest unleashed his rage on subordinates who had failed to protect what he considered proprietary information. "Tokyo Corporation has detailed knowledge of our contract structure, our pricing calculations, and our strategic positioning," he said, each word delivered with increasing intensity. "They're questioning provisions that took our legal team months to develop. Someone in this room has betrayed not just company confidentiality, but their own professional integrity." Webb shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face pale with the recognition that his department bore primary responsibility for the security breach. "Sir, we've reviewed all authorized personnel with contract access. Everyone has signed confidentiality agreements and undergone background screening." "Then someone unauthorized gained access," Ravencrest replied, his tone suggesting that such failure warranted consequences beyond simple termination. "Find them, or I'll find replacements for everyone in this room." The threat hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Naya had witnessed Ravencrest's management style during previous crises, but this level of barely contained violence was unprecedented. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, who suddenly found himself maneuvered into a position of weakness by an opponent he couldn't identify. Her phone vibrated with a text message from her mother. "Supervisor wants to see you before your shift tonight. Something about employee evaluation." The timing wasn't coincidental. Elena's supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, different Patterson than her economics teacher, had worked for Ravencrest Industries for 15 years, long enough to understand how information flowed through informal networks that connected cleaning staff across all floors. If the security investigation had expanded to include service personnel, Elena would become a natural target for questioning about her daughter's activities. Naya finished her assigned areas with mechanical efficiency, while her mind raced through scenarios that could protect her mother from consequences of her own strategic choices. Elena's employment represented their family's primary income source and health insurance coverage. Losing that stability would make Naya's college aspirations irrelevant, regardless of how many scholarships she might earn. At noon, she called Elena from the staff break room, choosing her words carefully, in case the conversation was being monitored. "Mom, how was your morning shift?" "Busy," Elena replied, her tone carrying undertones that suggested she understood the call's true purpose. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that some executives are concerned about building security. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual during our cleaning rounds. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the reality. Elena was being questioned about potential security breaches involving her daughter. Naya felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, the same rage that had sustained her through years of being underestimated and dismissed. But now that anger was tempered by strategic calculation. "I hope you told her that we take our responsibilities seriously," Naya said, her voice carrying meaning that would be clear to Elena without providing ammunition to anyone who might be listening. "Of course, mija. Our reputation speaks for itself." And the conversation ended with mutual understanding that their situation had become more precarious than either had anticipated. Naya spent her afternoon classes developing contingency plans that would protect Elena while advancing her own objectives. The investigation represented both danger and opportunity, if she could navigate the next few days carefully. Ravencrest's desperation might create openings that had previously been impossible. Her evening shift began with unusual scrutiny from floor supervisors who had never previously acknowledged her existence. Badge scans were reviewed more carefully, and her cleaning cart was subjected to inspection that would have been insulting if it hadn't been so obviously futile. She moved through her assigned areas with the same professional competence that had earned her mother's recommendation for the position. But her awareness of surveillance cameras had reached heightened intensity. The 32nd floor buzzed with overtime activity as executives struggled to contain damage that seemed to expand with each attempt at resolution. Tokyo Corporation had scheduled a video conference for the following morning, demanding clarification of contract terms that Ravencrest had hoped to slip past their attention. The meeting would either salvage the partnership or destroy months of careful relationship building. Naya emptied Webb's wastebasket and discovered printed copies of her own analysis, the 40-page document that had exposed every weakness in Ravencrest's negotiation strategy. Someone had downloaded the file from Tokyo Corporation's sharing portal and distributed copies throughout the International Relations Department. Her recommendations were being treated as official critique of American cultural insensitivity. She smiled grimly as she shredded the documents according to standard confidentiality protocols. Tomorrow's video conference would determine whether her strategic gamble had been worth the escalating risks. Tokyo Corporation would either accept Ravencrest's explanations and proceed with the flawed partnership, or they would demand changes that acknowledged her expertise as essential to successful collaboration. Either outcome would reveal the true balance of power in negotiations that had moved far beyond anyone's initial expectations. Naya had positioned herself as the invisible force that could determine the fate of a billion-dollar deal, but visibility brought dangers that could destroy everything she had worked to achieve. The next 24 hours would determine whether she had been clever enough to reshape corporate dynamics or merely foolish enough to believe that talent could overcome the institutional prejudices that governed American business culture. The pre-dawn silence of Washington Heights carried the weight of decision as Naya sat at her rescued desk laptop screen, illuminating her face with blue-white determination. 7 hours remained before Tokyo Corporation's video conference with Ravencrest Industries, and she had spent the night preparing for what would either be her vindication or her destruction. The choice was no longer between safety and ambition. Ravencrest's investigation had eliminated safety as an option. Her phone displayed 17 missed calls from Marcus Webb, each one accompanied by increasingly frantic voicemails that revealed the desperation consuming Ravencrest's executive team. The Tokyo Corporation meeting had been moved up by 6 hours a change that suggested their patience with American explanations had reached its limit. Webb's final message, recorded at 4:37 a.m., carried the exhausted tone of a man facing professional extinction. "Miss Rhodes, this is Marcus Webb from Ravencrest Industries International Relations. I know this might seem unusual, but Tokyo Corporation specifically requested your participation in today's meeting. They've indicated that your cultural analysis has been invaluable to their understanding of our partnership proposal. Please call me immediately so we can arrange appropriate compensation for your consulting services." The message represented everything Naya had worked toward: official recognition of her expertise from the same executives who had mocked her existence just days earlier. But Webb's desperate courtesy couldn't disguise the trap inherent in his offer. Accepting would require revealing her age and background, exposing her to charges of corporate espionage that could destroy her future before it had properly begun. She opened her secure email account and composed a message to Kenji Yamamoto with the formal precision that Japanese business culture demanded. The communication would either establish her as a legitimate consultant or expose her as an ambitious teenager who had overreached her position. "Dear Mr. Yamamoto," she wrote, her fingers moving across the keyboard with surgical certainty. "I appreciate Tokyo Corporation's confidence in my cultural analysis of the Ravencrest partnership proposal. However, recent developments have made clear that full disclosure of my background is necessary for ethical continuation of our professional relationship." She paused, considering how to present her circumstances without appearing deceptive or unprofessional. The corporate world operated on assumptions about credibility that rarely accommodated exceptional individuals who didn't fit standard categories. "I am currently 17 years old and completing my final year of secondary education while working part-time to support my family's financial needs. My linguistic expertise has been developed through 9 years of independent study, supplemented by university-level instruction from Professor Hiroshi Tanaka at Columbia University. My access to Ravencrest's contract documents was obtained through my employment as a member of their custodial staff." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing whether the ground below would support her weight. She continued writing with the same methodical precision that had guided her translation work. "While my unconventional background may raise questions about my qualifications, I believe my analysis speaks for itself. The contract provisions I identified as problematic represent genuine threats to successful Japanese-American business collaboration. My recommendations address both cultural sensitivities and legal protections that would benefit all parties involved." Then she attached copies of her academic transcripts, letters of recommendation from Professor Tanaka, and samples of her translation work that demonstrated university-level competency. The documentation wouldn't overcome age-based prejudices, but it would establish that her expertise was legitimate despite its unconventional development. "I understand if Tokyo Corporation prefers to work with consultants who possess traditional corporate credentials. However, I hope my contributions have demonstrated that valuable insights can emerge from unexpected sources when cultural understanding is prioritized over institutional assumptions. The email concluded with an offer that represented either strategic brilliance or suicidal overconfidence. If you decide to proceed with today's meeting despite these revelations, I would be honored to participate as your cultural consultant rather than as Ravencrest's representative. My analysis suggests that your interests and theirs are not currently aligned. She sent the message at 5:43 a.m., then began preparing for a confrontation that would determine whether intelligence could overcome the systematic prejudices that governed corporate America. Elena had already left for her morning shift, but she had prepared breakfast with extra care that indicated maternal concern. A handwritten note beside Naya's coffee cup read, "Mija, remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Your father would be proud." The reference to her father, who had died in a construction accident when she was 12, carried emotional weight that her mother rarely invoked. Elena's support represented more than parental encouragement. It was permission to take risks that could reshape their circumstances permanently. Naya's phone rang at 6:15 with an international number that made her pulse accelerate. Yamamoto's voice carried across the digital connection with the measured authority she had come to expect from their previous conversations. "Miss Rhodes, I have reviewed your message with considerable interest," he said, his English pronunciation careful but confident. "Your honesty demonstrates the integrity that has been absent from our recent communications with Ravencrest Industries. Tokyo Corporation values directness above conventional credentials." Relief flooded through her system, but Yamamoto's next words introduced complications she hadn't anticipated. "We would like to proceed with today's meeting, but under modified circumstances. Rather than participating as Ravencrest's consultant, you will join our negotiation team as cultural advisor. This arrangement will require physical presence at their offices, where you will represent Tokyo Corporation's interests directly." The proposal was both vindication and nightmare scenario. Naya would finally receive recognition for her expertise, but that recognition would occur in Ravencrest's boardroom, where her identity as a teenage custodial worker would be exposed to the same executives who had dismissed her existence. "I accept your offer," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos churning in her chest. "What time should I arrive?" "The meeting begins at 10 o'clock. Please arrive 15 minutes early for preliminary discussion. Dress code is professional business attire." Yamamoto paused, then added with warmth that hadn't been present in their previous communications. "Miss Rhodes, your courage in revealing your background demonstrates character that many experienced consultants lack. Tokyo Corporation is honored to work with someone who prioritizes truth over convenience." The conversation ended with logistical details about meeting room locations and security procedures. Naya had 2 hours to transform herself from invisible custodial worker into professional consultant, a metamorphosis that would require more than wardrobe changes. She opened her closet and selected the one business suit. She owned a charcoal gray ensemble that Elena had purchased from a consignment shop for college interviews. The fabric showed slight wear at the elbows, but careful pressing had restored its professional appearance. She paired it with low heels and jewelry that suggested competence without ostentation. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a young woman whose confidence had been earned through years of systematic preparation for opportunities that others assumed she could never access. The face looking back carried determination that had survived dismissal, mockery, and systematic underestimation. At 8:30, she called Washington Heights High School's attendance office and informed them that she would be absent due to a family emergency, technically accurate since her family's financial future depended on the next few hours. The subway ride to Manhattan carried her through neighborhoods that represented different levels of American economic opportunity. From Queens' working-class communities to Midtown's gleaming corporate towers, the journey traced the distance between her origins and her aspirations. Ravencrest Industries' lobby buzzed with morning activity as executives and support staff began another day of generating wealth through strategic manipulation of global markets. Naya approached the security desk with credentials that Yamamoto had arranged through diplomatic channels, her visitor badge identifying her as Cultural Consultant Tokyo Corporation. The security guard's expression shifted from routine politeness to confused recognition as he processed her identity. She was simultaneously the teenage custodial worker he had seen countless times, and the international consultant whose credentials demanded respect. 60th floor conference room A, he said, his tone uncertain about which version of her identity should receive acknowledgement. Elevators are to your right. Naya rode upward through floors that housed the machinery of American capitalism, each level representing different aspects of corporate power that she was about to challenge directly. The 60th floor conference room commanded panoramic views of Manhattan that emphasized the scope of decisions made within its walls. The performance was about to begin. Conference Room A on the 60th floor commanded panoramic views of Manhattan's financial district, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing architectural monuments to American capitalism. The polished mahogany table could accommodate 20 participants, though today's meeting would determine the fate of relationships worth more than the annual GDP of small nations. Crystal water glasses caught morning sunlight, casting prismatic reflections across legal documents that represented months of careful negotiation. Naya arrived at 9:45, her charcoal business suit and confident bearing transforming her from invisible service worker into professional consultant. The security escort maintained polite distance, reserved for international guests, unaware that she had cleaned these same floors countless times under entirely different circumstances. Kenji Yamamoto rose from his seat as she entered his formal bow, demonstrating the cultural respect that had been absent from every previous interaction she had witnessed in corporate America. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, his silver hair styled with precision that reflected decades of international business experience. Behind him stood two associates, whose presence suggested that Tokyo Corporation considered this meeting worthy of their senior leadership team. Ms. Rhodes, we are honored by your willingness to participate in today's discussions. Yamamoto said, his English carrying the measured cadence that characterized high-level diplomatic communication. Your analysis has provided clarity regarding cultural factors that could significantly impact our business relationship with American partners. She accepted his handshake with professional composure, though her pulse accelerated as voices echoed from the corridor outside. Ravencrest's team was approaching their conversation audible through walls designed to contain confidential negotiations, but couldn't muffle the aggressive energy that preceded confrontational meetings. Before our American colleagues arrive, Yamamoto continued, settling into his chair with practiced grace, I want to express Tokyo Corporation's appreciation for your intellectual honesty. Your disclosure of personal circumstances demonstrates integrity that transcends conventional business relationships. The conference room door opened with hydraulic smoothness, admitting Marcus Webb, whose face reflected the sleepless anxiety of someone whose career depended on the next few hours. Behind him entered Patricia Chen David Park and three additional executives, whose expensive suits couldn't disguise their collective nervousness about facing international partners who had questioned their professional competence. Maxfield Ravencrest entered last, his commanding presence filling the room with authority that seemed to bend atmospheric pressure around his movements. His steel blue eyes swept across the assembled participants with predatory assessment before landing on Naya with an expression that shifted from recognition to confusion to barely controlled rage within 3 seconds. What the hell is the cleaning girl doing in my conference room? The question exploded from him with volcanic force, his voice carrying across the space like a physical blow. Every person at the table froze, the temperature seeming to drop several degrees as his words hung in the air. Yamamoto's expression hardened into something that could cut diamond. His associates exchanged glances that communicated volumes about American business culture and its relationship to basic human dignity. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, broken only by the mechanical hum of climate control systems. "Mr. Crest," Yamamoto said, his voice carrying ice that made Arctic winters seem tropical. "I would like to introduce Miss Naya Rhodes, Tokyo Corporation's cultural consultant for this partnership evaluation. She has provided invaluable analysis of communication strategies that will determine whether our organizations can establish mutually beneficial relationships." The words landed in the room like artillery shells, their impact visible in the way Webb's face went pale, and Chen's carefully composed expression cracked to reveal genuine shock. Park fumbled with his legal documents papers, scattering across the mahogany surface as he processed the implications of what he was witnessing. Ravencrest's jaw worked silently as his brain struggled to reconcile contradictory information. The teenage custodial worker he had mocked days earlier was now sitting at his conference table as an official representative of the corporation he desperately needed as a business partner. The cognitive dissonance was written across his features in expressions that cycled through disbelief, rage, and dawning comprehension. "This is impossible," he said, though his voice carried less conviction than confusion. "She's 17 years old. She works in our custodial department. There's been some kind of mistake." Naya opened the leather portfolio that Yamamoto had provided and withdrew copies of the 40-page analysis that had exposed every weakness in Ravencrest's contract strategy. Her movements were deliberate and professional, each gesture calculated to demonstrate competence that transcended age-based assumptions about capability. "Mr. Ravencrest," she said, her voice carrying across the room with crystalline clarity, "there has indeed been a mistake. Your contract proposals contain language that violates fundamental principles of respectful international partnership. Tokyo Corporation has asked me to address these concerns directly." She stood and moved to the projection screen with the confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Her presentation slides appeared with technical precision, each one documenting specific contract provisions that favored American interests while offering minimal benefits to their Japanese partners. Shipping cost calculations have been manipulated through currency projections that assume dollar strength will continue indefinitely. She continued, her laser pointer highlighting numerical tables that revealed systematic deception. Quality control standards accommodate American manufacturing tolerances that fall below Japanese expectations. Most problematically, intellectual property agreements provide Ravencrest access to Toyota's technological innovations while protecting your developments behind restrictive licensing terms. The room fell into cathedral silence as her analysis dismantled months of careful legal construction. Each slide revealed another layer of manipulation, another attempt to structure partnership terms that would benefit Ravencrest while leaving Tokyo Corporation vulnerable to exploitation. Webb's face had progressed from pale to gray, while Chen stared at documents she had helped draft with growing horror. "These provisions," Naya concluded, returning to her seat, with movements that commanded attention through their restraint, "represent either incompetence or intentional deception. Tokyo Corporation requires clarification of which interpretation accurately describes Ravencrest's negotiation approach." Yamamoto nodded with approval that carried implications extending far beyond simple business satisfaction. "Miss Rhodes has identified concerns that our legal team flagged independently. We appreciate her cultural insights regarding communication styles that could facilitate more equitable agreement structures." Ravencrest's composure finally shattered like glass under pressure. His hands gripped the table edge with force that made his knuckles white. His breathing accelerated to the rhythm of someone experiencing acute stress. The man who had built an empire through strategic manipulation found himself cornered by a teenager whose intelligence he had dismissed without consideration. "You recorded our private meeting," he said, his voice rising with each word until it approached shouting. "You stole confidential documents and sold them to our competitors. That's corporate espionage, and I'll see you prosecuted to the full extent of federal law." Naya reached into her portfolio and withdrew a small digital recorder, its red light blinking with mechanical persistence. She placed it on the mahogany table where everyone could see its display showing 47 minutes of active recording time. "Mr. Raven Crest," she said, her tone carrying the surgical precision of someone delivering a fatal diagnosis. "This device has been recording our current conversation since I entered this room. Would you like me to replay your earlier statement about giving my mother your job if I could translate your Japanese contract?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Everyone at the table understood that she held evidence of his public humiliation of a teenage employee, documented proof of workplace harassment that would destroy his reputation if made public. Webb found his voice first, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Sir, perhaps we should consider revising our contract terms to address Tokyo Corporation's concerns. Ms. Rhodes has clearly identified areas where cultural sensitivity could improve partnership outcomes." "Ms. Rhodes," Yamamoto said, his tone carrying warmth that contrasted sharply with the ice he had directed toward Ravencrest. "Tokyo Corporation would be honored to offer you a formal consulting position with compensation appropriate to your expertise. Your insights have proven invaluable for navigating cross-cultural business relationships." The offer represented vindication beyond her most optimistic projections. Official recognition from one of the world's largest corporations. Financial compensation that would transform her family's circumstances and professional credentials that would open doors throughout international business communities. Ravencrest remained silent, his empire of arrogance crumbling around him like walls built on inadequate foundations. The man who had dismissed her potential was now witnessing its vindication in front of international partners whose respect he desperately needed to maintain. Tokyo Corporation's acceptance of her expertise represented more than business success. It was public validation that talent existed in forms that traditional power structures failed to recognize. The cleaning girl had become the consultant, the dismissed teenager had become the expert, and the invisible worker had become the force that determined whether billion-dollar partnerships would succeed. The balance of power had shifted permanently, and everyone in the room understood that nothing would ever be the same. The boardroom of Ravencrest Industries had never witnessed a corporate restructuring of such magnitude. 6 weeks after the Tokyo Corporation meeting, the mahogany table that had once hosted discussions of profit maximization now served as the stage for implementing policies that would reshape the company's fundamental approach to human capital development. The autumn sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated documents that represented more than legal compliance. They embodied a philosophical transformation forced by circumstances no one could have predicted. Patricia Chen, recently promoted to Chief Executive Officer, following Ravencrest's resignation, presided over the emergency board meeting with the measured authority of someone who had inherited both opportunity and responsibility in equal measure. Around the table sat directors, whose quarterly bonuses depended on adapting to realities that challenged every assumption about talent identification and workforce development. The new hiring protocols eliminate age restrictions for consulting positions and establish competency-based evaluation criteria that prioritize demonstrated expertise over traditional credentials. Chen announced, her voice carrying across the room with crystalline clarity. "Tokyo Corporation has made continuation of our partnership contingent on implementing these changes within 90 days. The ultimatum represented more than contractual obligation. It constituted acknowledgement that Raven Crest Industries' survival depended on embracing principles that had been absent from their corporate culture since the company's founding. The $500 million partnership hung in the balance, its continuation dependent on proving that American business practices could evolve beyond institutional prejudices. Marcus Webb, whose department had been restructured around cultural competency rather than traditional business development, reviewed implementation timelines with the nervous energy of someone whose career had been salvaged through circumstances beyond his control. His promotion to Senior Director of International Relations carried responsibilities that required skills he was still developing through intensive cultural sensitivity training. Ms. Rhodes has agreed to serve as our primary liaison with Tokyo Corporation, while maintaining her consulting relationship with Columbia University's East Asian Studies program. Webb continued referencing organizational changes that had transformed a teenage custodial worker into one of the company's most valuable strategic assets. Her compensation package reflects the market value of expertise that prevented our partnership from collapsing entirely. The financial arrangements had required board approval that acknowledged realities no one had anticipated. Naya's consulting fees exceeded the annual salaries of junior executives, while her mother's promotion to facilities management director had eliminated the economic insecurity that had defined their family's circumstances for as long as either could remember. David Park, whose legal department had spent weeks revising contracts to eliminate the manipulative language that had nearly destroyed international relationships, distributed copies of the scholarship fund proposal that would serve as Raven Crest Industries' most visible commitment to systemic change. The Naya Rhodes Educational Excellence Fund will provide full scholarships to academically gifted students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Park explained his presentation slides, displaying eligibility criteria that prioritized intellectual potential over family connections. Initial funding of $2 million will support 20 students annually, with preference given to those demonstrating linguistic aptitude and cultural competency. The scholarship represented vindication that extended beyond personal achievement. Students from circumstances similar to Naya's would receive opportunities that had previously been accessible only to those whose parents possessed sufficient resources to navigate higher education's financial complexities. Chen's assistant entered, carrying sealed envelopes that contained formal notifications from the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding their investigation into Raven Crest's business practices. The regulatory scrutiny had been triggered by Tokyo Corporation's complaint about fraudulent contract provisions, but its scope had expanded to encompass systematic review of the company's international agreements spanning the previous 5 years. The SEC has concluded their preliminary investigation and found evidence of contract manipulation that violated federal regulations governing international business partnerships, Chen announced. However, our cooperation with their inquiry and implementation of corrective measures has resulted in financial penalties rather than criminal prosecution. The settlement required payment of $15 million in fines, but more significantly, it mandated ongoing federal oversight of all international contracts for the next 3 years. Compliance would be monitored by independent auditors, whose responsibilities included ensuring that cultural competency remained integrated into every aspect of global business development strategy. Maxfield Ravencrest's absence from these proceedings carried symbolic weight that extended beyond his personal downfall. His resignation had been accompanied by forfeiture of stock options worth hundreds of millions, while his public apology broadcast during a press conference that had drawn international media attention acknowledged that his leadership had embodied prejudices incompatible with 21st century business ethics. Naya's influence on these transformations extended beyond her official consulting position. Her analysis of corporate culture had identified systemic biases that affected hiring, promotion, and client relationship management across all departments. The recommendations she had submitted to the new leadership team were being implemented as mandatory training programs that would reshape how every employee approached diversity and talent recognition. The International Relations Department had been restructured around principles that prioritized linguistic expertise and cultural understanding over traditional business credentials. New hiring criteria emphasized demonstrated competency in cross-cultural communication, while promotion requirements included successful completion of cultural sensitivity certification programs. Tokyo Corporation's satisfaction with these changes had resulted in expansion of their original partnership agreement. The revised contract included provisions for technology sharing that would benefit both organizations, while its financial terms reflected the mutual respect that had emerged from acknowledging each partner's legitimate interests and cultural perspectives. Elena Rhodes's transformation from custodial worker to facilities management director represented more than individual advancement. It symbolized recognition that exceptional performance could be demonstrated in any role, regardless of its perceived status within organizational hierarchies. Her new responsibilities included oversight of building operations that employed hundreds of service workers whose contributions had previously been invisible to executive leadership. The employee handbook revisions that Elena had helped develop established protocols, ensuring that all workers, regardless of their positions, would be treated with dignity and respect. Harassment policies now included specific protections against the kind of public humiliation that Ravencrest had inflicted on Naya, while promotion pathways had been created to allow advancement based on demonstrated competence rather than educational credentials alone. 6 months after the confrontation that had triggered these changes, Ravencrest Industries had become a case study in corporate transformation that was being analyzed by business schools throughout the United States. The company's evolution from an organization that exemplified institutional prejudice to one that embraced talent in all its forms represented proof that systemic change was possible when consequences made adaptation essential for survival. Chen's closing remarks to the board meeting emphasized that their transformation represented beginning rather than conclusion of necessary changes. Excellence exists in forms we've been trained not to recognize. She said, her words carrying implications that would guide corporate culture for years to come. Our success depends on remaining vigilant against the prejudices that nearly destroyed everything we've worked to build. The meeting adjourned with understanding that Ravencrest Industries had survived its crisis through embracing principles that should have guided their operations from the beginning. The company that had once dismissed a teenage custodial worker had been saved by that same individual's expertise, proving that talent and intelligence could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances when given opportunity to flourish. 6 months later, Naya Rhodes stood before 25 high school students in the renovated conference room that had once witnessed her greatest humiliation. The space had been transformed into headquarters of the Naya Rhodes Educational Excellence Fund, its walls lined with photographs of scholarship recipients whose academic achievements challenged every assumption about untapped potential in America's underserved communities. Her Navy business suit reflected the professional confidence she had earned through proving that excellence emerges from unexpected places when given opportunity to flourish. The teenagers seated around the mahogany table represented diverse backgrounds, united by intellectual curiosity and economic circumstances that threatened to limit their academic aspirations. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize your potential, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed institutional prejudice into personal triumph. The same intelligence that solves complex problems in your homework will reshape corporate boardrooms if you refuse to accept limitations that others try to impose. Harvard Business School's early admission letter sat framed on her desk, acceptance secured through academic achievements that had accelerated beyond traditional timelines. Tokyo Corporation's consulting contract provided financial security that allowed her to pursue education without economic anxiety, while her mother's executive position ensured stability for their family's future. Elena Rhodes entered the room carrying refreshments, her title of Vice President of Operations, reflecting recognition that exceptional performance deserved institutional respect, regardless of its initial context. Remember, Naya concluded, watching young faces that mirrored her own determination. Every system that seems unchangeable was created by people who convinced others it represented natural order. Your intelligence has the power to create better systems that recognize talent wherever it exists. The scholarship recipients filed out carrying applications for summer internships at companies that had learned to value competence over conventional credentials. Their paths forward would be different from Naya's, but they carried the same understanding that excellence transcends circumstances when supported by preparation, opportunity, and courage to demand recognition. Outside the conference room windows, Manhattan's skyline stretched toward horizons that no longer seemed impossibly distant for those willing to challenge assumptions about who deserved access to American success.